Alrighty, so this is an exciting one. This is going to be my first deck guide for the start of Season 2 or Set 2. I've opted for using the new Han. I'm going with a mono red build. Now, I've tested this. It plays pretty well. I'm not going to go here and say this is some meta breaker. There is no meta yet, right? That I'm making this video and this play testing has been done before the set has even been released. So it's still very early in a set's lifespan. But I have played this against good decks, against good players, and it seems to have some game. I'm pretty excited about this new Han in general, and excited to see what this mono red build can progress into. So, why Han? Well, early on, when deciding what kind of new deck to work on, especially with a new set where there's a bunch of new cards, like to focus on certain things that I would deem broken, right? Mechanics that I think are kind of busted in general, and then go from there, right? It doesn't mean they always pan out or end up like being overpowered or the best decks, but it seems like a good starting point. From set 1, broken leaders in my mind would have been things like Boba Fett, right, who generates free resources. The previous Han Solo, right, free ramp. Sabine at the time was the only 4-cost leader. That seems like something to kind of try to work with. Palpatine, I thought, had a pretty like build aroundy kind of potentially busted ability with his like perpetually being able to draw, right? These are some things that you try to keep an eye on. It doesn't mean all of it ends up busted. It just means that it seems like to be a pretty good starting point when starting to theory craft. So this Han falls in that category, right? He's cheating on resources all game. His ability basically says all your units cost 1 less as long as you're willing to deal some damage to them. And that's pretty strong. So that's kind of why I'm drawn towards him. He's also got a cheap deploy, right? We like cheap deploys. 5 cost is a sweet spot, right? Why mono red? So I think Han is potentially going to have a few really good builds. Which ones end up being the best is not something I can say for certain right now. But I've opted towards mono red for a few reasons. First of all, I think we've reached kind of a critical mass of double red cards that I would say are good enough to kind of start working on double red. I was not a fan of double red in the first set. I don't think it was particularly powerful. The best version of it was probably Sabine, but it was mostly just being carried by the fact that Sabine was good and a lot of the heroic units were good. I think it was definitely the third Sabine in the pecking order. But now we have reached, we've gotten a bunch of new double red cards. A few of them are quite powerful. So I think we can start really digging into this double red stuff. Aggression is a nuts card. It was my #1 riser for this set. When I made a video previously, I had aggression as the #1 card. I think will be pushed forward, and so far I think that may be spot on. I think this card is very powerful and it's going to do some really good things into this new set. And Tarkin Town, right? So we get to play Tarkin Town, which I think is a very good base. It's a very smooth kind of counter action to getting energy conversion labbed out of decks, right? You can usually trade base for base in those scenarios, which is really strong. Yeah, so like aggression, Target Town, these are obviously really good. You'll see some of the other double red cards that I'm playing in a bit. So this is the deck list. Now you see there's no actual sideboard here. There's going to be a section later in the video which is like a maybe board. There's no meta. There's no decks to specifically target. I mean, we know there's going to be like some Sabine aggro most likely in Boba. But I don't yet want to get into the minutia of like these are the 10 sideboard cards, or these are the 100% correct 50 main deck cards. This is just like the deck as currently constructed. We'll go through all the cards individually, and then we'll have a little talk about other cards I'm considering and things to kind of mess with, and potential strategies to counter specific archetypes. All right, first off, events. So as you can see, there's a lot of interaction here. So why are we playing interaction? This is kind of an aggro deck, right? Well, it is an aggressive deck, but it's never going to be faster than Sabine. So because of that, it needs to be able to interact with Sabine. On top of that, with like the way like mid-range in this game, especially Boba Fett. It's a very aggressive mid-range. You can't just count on being able to jam units and race them, especially through cards like Cunning. So I believe for this deck to flourish, it's going to need to rely on some interaction, and this is what we got. So first of all, Heroic Sacrifice. Now this is not interaction. This card didn't even start in my deck in early playtesting, and then like the numbers slowly went up as it kept performing. We're up to the 3. The card's just good. I mean, this does dig into the aggro part of this deck. It does enable some trade-ups when needed, and also we end up hitting our own units for 2 damage a lot of time just to play them, right? So being able to throw them at something right before they die seems good, right? We can play a 1-cost 4/1 in this deck, so it's not too unrealistic to just, you know, next turn pay 1 and dome them for 6 and draw a card. That's a 2-card, that's a 1-card, like you're drawing a card, so you've only like used up 1 and you've done 6 damage to base, right? Heroic Sac has just performed pretty well here, and it's definitely slanted towards the aggro portion of this deck. Daring Raid, I think, is just a really smooth card. Being able to like finish off units, sometimes kill like Kylo's ships and other 3/2s that crop up, and then the ability to close out games with base damage. Because it's so cheap, it just fits in, right? And this works well with Tarkin Town. We are going to see a lot more 3/5s in this set. Daring Raid plus Tarkin Town does easily take one of those out, leaving you with 2 energy on turn 2, which can still be used to play a 3-drop in this deck. So, good card. Carabast, probably the first time I've ever put this into a deck, but, you know, it's basically always online for 3 damage in this deck. 2-cost, deal 3. If I could play that card, I'd play that in a lot of places. It's not flashy. It has a little more upside than that sometimes. It also has a little more downside, as you can't play it when you have no units, or if you have no damage units, it's only dealing 1. But the floor here isn't too hard to achieve, right? Like you can get this to deal 3 damage quite frequently, at which point it works quite nicely. Think about like a turn 2 against an aggro deck, right? You can play a Carabast plus a 2-drop on the same turn. That 2-drop comes in with 2 damage, actually turning on the Carabast, so that's nice. Open Fire. You know, it's been a red staple. I think it's going to be less good in this set because, again, there's going to be more 3/5s running around. This is a card I could see not ending up in the final version, but for now, I still want more interaction against hard aggro, and Open Fire does just that. And Aggression, maybe the best card in this entire deck. It's a very flexible card. I think there's going to be a lot more upgrades running around, whether they are things like Direct Saber or just more shielded units, but also bounties are going to be played. This is very often a 2-for-1. It can help push damage if you need to in a pinch. A 2-drop plus this can kill something like a Poe, right? You deal 4, you ready your 2-drop, you can launch that 2-drop into a Poe. It's just a flexible card, and it does a lot of what we want being done. All right, the early drop. So this is everything that you can play on turn 1 in this deck. It's a lot, right? There's, 3, 6, 18, 20, 23 cards. And we don't really want to play Fleet Lieutenant on turn 1, but we can. The early drops in this deck are absolutely cracked. We've got Bo-Katan and Cassian Andor are both 3/3s for 2. We get 6 Battlefield Marines in this deck. Sabine Wren is somehow the 3rd best ground unit turn 1 play, and she was basically the best ground unit turn 1 play in Red Hero decks up until now. A-Wing, still a fantastic card, even though it does have some more natural counters in the 3/2 ships running around. So those are like our very best turn 1 plays. The Heroic Renegade can be a 1-cost 4/1. That's basically what he is. I don't really want to play him as a 2, but 1-cost 4/1 is pretty strong. Then we got Fighters for Freedom. Not so much a turn 1 play. I prefer this as a follow-up or to be played alongside a few other units on the Han flip turn. But Saboteur is nice, especially if we're going to be facing off against things like Crafty Smuggler or Dr. Evazin or other such units. And it just does that incidental damage. It is not a flashy card. It is not one of the better cards here, but I still think it fits. Red 3, you know, it's a core aggro card. We have a lot of heroic cards. Not everything, but a lot. And also being able to squeeze this into a turn for 2 cost helps a lot. Fleet Lieutenant is a weird one because we don't have a ton of rebels. It's I think 18 was my count, and our leader is not a rebel. However, Fleet Lieutenant is so front-loaded on his ability that when you get a 1-cost discount on Fleet Lieutenant, it's very strong. Being able to play him for 2 cost, comes in and does the action sheet plus the buff, is a very good play. And I think it warrants a spot, although I think there's some flexibility here. It might not be consistent enough. It's something that definitely needs to be tracked. Big things. So not everything here is enormous. It's just, this is every unit that can't be played on turn 1. That's basically what I put here. K2, staple, right? It does the aggro thing very well. It's actually not too bad just playing this on turn 2 as a 4/2. If it's able to get its attack off the next turn, fantastic. If it trades with something and does 3 damage or the discard, also great. Poe is nuts. Poe is just absolute hammer. Being able to play him as a 6/4 on turn 3 is a really powerful play and one of the main stabilizing forces against like Sabine, for instance, who wants to go quicker, right? But their flip turn, you stick a 6/4 Poe down. They have decisions now. Like, are they trading into that? Are they like ambushing a K2 just to trade with it? Are they gonna like swing Sabine into it off of like a wing leader? It poses a very big problem, but for all decks basically, it's just really strong card. It's one of the best cards in the set. Wrecker, also just a beast. You just have to keep in mind that you can't, well, you can. You just might not want to use Han's ability before you deploy him to play Wrecker because he'll blow up one of your resources and then you'll go down to 4 and you won't be able to deploy. So you just have to like track that a little bit. But other than that, a 5-cost Wrecker is nuts. A 6-cost Wrecker is also nuts. So great. Let's play lots of Wreckers. Rancor, another double red card that I think got a little underappreciated on first release. Now, I don't love it as a 6-cost, but I really like it as a 5-cost. Think of it as Poe Jr., right? If this is a 5-cost 6/6 Overwhelm that has that immediate board impacting effect, that's a strong card. That 2 damage, don't dismiss it, right? Even if it doesn't kill anything, it's going to pose a problem for your opponent knowing that they have a 6/6 in front of them, and now their leader that had 7 health a moment ago now has 5 and might get eaten up by the Rancor. Rancor is actually one of the reasons I want to be in double red alongside Aggression and Bo-Katan. Like, those are the 9 double red cards, and I think they're all very good. Crate Dragon. It's a one of. I'm almost certain it's going to be a more of in the 60 cards, and it's in the final form of this deck. It's just such a hammer against certain decks. I like this card as an 8-cost, right? It doesn't matter that it comes in as a 10/8 for 8. That's just, like, at that amount of health, it's kind of irrelevant. It's a closer against a lot of decks, right? The fact that even to remove it, you have to generally take damage to your face is going to be a problem for things like control decks when you start getting them into that near death range, and then you like play a Crate Dragon and they have to like vanquish it, take 5, and then you can finish them off with Burn or something, or another Crate Dragon, right? I like Crate Dragon. I think it's one of the better legendaries in this set, and for now it's a 1 of in the main deck. Who knows what that's going to be, right? It might be a 0 of in the main deck. Eventually it might be more, but for now, just wanted to highlight that. All right, just a little bit about the Han flip turn. So there's a couple things you can do here, right? The first is like play the big guy, right? On 5 resources, you can play a Rancor or a Wrecker, which is both plays are very strong. The Wrecker, as I mentioned, you'd want to do that after you deploy if possible, just so that you can still actually deploy. In addition to the big smashing plays, the weenie spam is real. So since Han Solo's ability is not capped when he's in deploy, you can just use it over and over again. So you can play something like Fighters for Freedom for 2, Red 3 for 2, deal a damage, Bo-Katan for 1, deal a damage, right? You can play 3 units without breaking a sweat with that ability. It's not something you probably want to do against a deck playing Overwhelming Barrage, but against a lot of decks, I think that kind of spam is going to be really problematic. Going so wide so early Like, you're getting your leader out too. You could end up with like 5 units in play after this turn. And yeah, they're all going to die to one attack basically, but you have so many of them, and you're just going to start pushing a lot of damage. But there's also things in between. Obviously, you can play like aggression plus a 2-drop on the Han turn. That's fantastic. Removal plus a couple 2-drops. Great. There's just a lot of flexibility with his deploy. I think it's incredibly powerful that they let this stay as printed, where it's uncapped. He can do it as much as he wants, and it's very strong. All right. Promised you some conversation about cards I haven't included yet, but might eventually. So briefly, right? R2 is only here because you can play it for 0 with Han's ability. It's actually one of, I think, 2 1-drops that don't die to Han's ability, the other one being Cantina Braggart. I think that warrants some consideration, being able to play a 0-cost unit, and as such, I'm going to take a closer look at R2. Desperate Attack, you know, it's almost always going to be online in this deck, so it's a 1-cost like mini Surprise Strike, so that's something we might want to look at. Partisan Insurgent's a card I come back to a lot. It usually doesn't feel good to me it's hard to get it to attack for 3 because they just kill the other unit most of the time, and then you're left with a 1/4. But you know, the deck is entirely red, so it seems okay. Cripple Authority, and then on the second row there, Pillage. So that's an idea for how to combat control decks. There's a couple ideas, but the mass discard, I think, could be an angle. Cripple Authority, especially because we're playing Wrecker, it's going to be online a decent amount. And Pillage, I just think, is a really good card. You can look at Force Surrender too, although I don't know if we need to go into that route now that Pillage exists. In addition to what we already having K2, that's a lot of discard. We might want to fit in a little bit more, but it's kind of an idea for a sideboard strategy against control decks. The other being the Chaos of War, which is the one up there on the top right that just deals damage to both players equal to cards in hand. Now, I haven't liked this in a lot of matchups, which is why I did initially have it in my main deck just to see how it performed, and basically I was just never able to play it. But there are matchups where I think it would shine, mainly against the really hard control decks, things like the mono blue or the yellow blue decks that do tend to be a little more card heavy in their hand, and also who also tend to be able to more easily lock up a game with control, and then just having direct base damage to finish them off might be good. Now, this doesn't work in tandem with the discard plan, so it is something you'll have to kind of figure out which you think is better. Tech would be another card to kind of like maybe try to fit in for like long game stall out states. The assault ship on the bottom left there. It's a 3/4 Saboteur for 4, so like its main thing is that it can kind of get through a 7th Fleet Defender quite easily. It does get that +2 attack if you have less resources than your opponent. I don't know how reliably that's going to happen early in a game, but when it does, this being able to hit for 5 seems pretty interesting. Guerrilla Attack Pod. So works fantastically well with Han's ability. So you can play it for 5 as a 6/4. Now, will it be ready? Sometimes, right? If it was ready all the time, I think that would warrant a ton of consideration. My one thing about Guerrilla Attack Pod is I'm already playing Rancor and Wrecker. I don't think the pod is better than either of those cards. So how much more can we play in that chunky 6-cost slot? Maybe a little more than most decks play just because of Han's ability, but I'm not sure Guerrilla Attack Pod ends up making the cut. Mace Windu is a cool card. I mean, if you play him for 6 as a 5/5 ambush, that's kind of like playing Mercenary Company, but the upside here is if he can kill something and ready, having that happen a turn earlier is quite powerful. Now, I'm notably pretty low on Mace Windu as a card in general. I've never been impressed by it, but it is worth looking at a little closer in this Han deck because of the resource cheating. Great Dragon, we talked about. There's the other 2 copies. I think it's going to be prominent. The last one is that Desperado Freighter. It's a 5/6 for 5 with no text in space. That's a pretty strong unit, and it can come in as a 4-cost 5/4. Now, I think it warrants a close look here. It's a little awkward. Like, it doesn't do anything immediately. It doesn't like scare your opponent nearly as much as playing something like a Poe, right? But space units tend to be a bit smaller, and being able to just be the biggest thing in space early on might be pretty beneficial. All right, so that's it. That's like a mini deck guide kind of video. There's not going to be like meta discussion about this deck. We don't have one of those yet. But I think this deck has real legs. I'm going to continue testing it. I'm going to see if I end up thinking that this is the best Han version, new Han that is, and how far it can go remains to be seen. Until next time, take care.